Just last week, Jim Carrey attended the César Awards in Paris to receive an honorary César, which is France's highest cinematic distinction.
The officials said the award show confirmed that the real Jim Carrey was there. So that was him.
Okay, so picture this. Jim Carrey walks onto a stage in Paris to accept one of the biggest honors of his career. The crowd is going wild, cameras are flashing everywhere, and within minutes, the entire internet loses its mind. Not because of his speech, not because of some scandal backstage, but because millions of people suddenly became sure that the man standing up there taking the award was not actually Jim Carrey. I know, it sounds totally crazy. But here is what made this whole thing spiral completely out of control. When the rumors started blowing up across TikTok and Twitter, his team went quiet. There was no big denial, no laughing it off. Just silence, while the internet filled in every blank with something wilder than the last theory. And when they finally did respond, the statement was so short and so carefully worded that it only made people ask more questions. And listen, this was not some small corner of the internet talking. Within 48 hours, TikTok sleuths were zooming into screenshots of Carrey on that Paris stage. Reddit threads were comparing his face shape under the lights to photos from 20 years ago. YouTube creators were slowing down the footage frame by frame, trying to find proof that something was off. Some fans swore his voice sounded slightly different. Others said his famous smile looked wrong, like the spark behind it was missing. People who grew up watching this man do the most wild, over-the-top comedy in Hollywood history were suddenly saying the guy on stage in a tuxedo looked like a stranger wearing his face. And before anyone from his camp could even get ahead of it, posts claiming that the real Jim Carrey had gone missing years ago were racking up millions and millions of views. Okay, but here is the thing that really sent this whole story over the edge. On March 2nd, Jim Carrey's longtime publicist, Marlia Leslie, finally put out the first official response. Major outlets picked it up right away. TMZ ran it, People magazine ran it, Page 6 ran it, and if you were expecting some big shutdown of the rumors, some grand statement that would make everyone calm down, you were in for a surprise. Because the statement said almost nothing. Leslie confirmed that yes, Jim Carrey went to the César Awards in Paris, and yes, he took the honorary César Award given to him that evening. That was it. There was no mention of the clone theory, no flat-out denial, not even a casual, clearly this is silly. Here's a photo of him at breakfast this morning. Just the bare basics of facts that everyone already knew. Now, in the world of celebrity PR, that kind of quiet move is rarely an accident. Publicists know exactly what they are doing when they refuse to touch a rumor. The game plan is usually to avoid giving the conspiracy any air by acting like it does not exist. But this time, that game plan blew up in their faces. Because when millions of people are already suspicious and the official response basically says no comment on whether he is a clone, the internet does not hear calm and collected. It hears someone dodging the question. But hold on, because while all of this chaos was spreading online, something very different was happening behind the scenes at the César Awards offices in Paris. And this is the part of the story that hardly anyone actually heard. The people running the ceremony were watching this whole thing blow up in real time, and they could not believe what they were seeing. Remember, this was supposed to be a classy night honoring great films, one of the most respected awards in France, celebrating a legendary Hollywood career. Instead, their guest of honor was suddenly trending worldwide because people thought he was a body double. So one of their top leaders decided to step forward and clear things up. Gregory Collier, the head official of the César Awards, sat down with Variety and gave a detailed account that cut straight through the noise. According to Collier, the entire visit had been in the works for 8 full months. Not a few weeks, not a last-minute invite, 8 months of careful planning before Carrey ever set foot on that Paris stage. And what Collier shared next added a layer of behind-the-scenes detail that every single conspiracy post just happened to leave out. According to the people who put this event together, Jim Carrey did not just casually fly into Paris for a quick wave and a trophy. The man reportedly spent months working on a speech in French just for the ceremony. Let that sit for a second. Jim Carrey, the guy famous for talking out of his rear end in Ace Ventura, was apparently spending weeks learning how to say French words and calling the event team to ask about the right way certain phrases should sound. Collier described long talks about wording and tone, almost like Carrey was treating the speech like a show he refused to get wrong. And there is more. Carrey did not show up alone. He traveled to Paris with his partner, his daughter Jane, his grandson, and roughly 12 close friends and family members. His publicist, Marlia Leslie, was there in person at the ceremony the entire night. So, according to everyone who was actually in the room, this was not some mystery stand-in showing up out of nowhere. It was a carefully planned family trip surrounded by people who have known Jim Carrey for decades. Collier even called the entire online frenzy a non-issue. Simple as that. Case closed, right? Well, not quite, because the internet had already made up its mind. Okay, so here is where things get really messy. Even as these official answers started showing up in Variety and other major outlets, the online rumor machine actually sped up instead of slowing down. Some conspiracy threads treated the behind-the-scenes details as shady rather than calming. Fans kept pointing to tiny moments from the ceremony footage, claiming Carrey looked more serious than usual, or that his face seemed different from the wild, rubber-faced comedian they remembered from the 90s. Others pulled up clips from old interviews and swore his voice had a slightly different rhythm. Now, whether any of that held any real truth barely mattered at that point. The social media system had already decided this story was pure gold. Videos, guessing about the real Jim Carrey, kept stacking up millions of views. Comment sections turned into full-blown debate rooms, with fans arguing back and forth about jawlines and voice patterns. And the wildest part? The more calmly the official sources tried to explain things, the more certain corners of the internet treated those answers like part of a cover-up. But here is the twist that made this rumor feel almost real to a surprising number of fans. Jim Carrey himself has spent years saying things that blur the line between what is real and what is a show. And I am not talking about vague, deep thoughts. I am talking about specific, on-camera moments that popped back up at the worst possible time. Longtime fans remember those interviews where Carrey sat in a quiet room during New York Fashion Week and calmly told reporters that there is no me, there are just things happening. At the time, people debated whether he was joking, being deep, or just leaning into the strange persona that made him famous in the first place. But after the César Awards moment blew up, those old clips started spreading everywhere again. TikTok creators stitched together footage of Carrey talking about the character called Jim Carrey, right next to clips from the Paris stage. And suddenly, this wild story started forming, where fans joked that Carrey had been warning us all along. Some people said he had replaced himself. Others claimed the quiet, thoughtful version of the actor was proof that something deep had changed years ago. Obviously, none of this had a single piece of real proof behind it, but the story was too good to ignore. And once the social media system picked it up, there was no stopping it. And when you actually watch the ceremony footage from Paris, you can kind of see why some viewers felt something was different. Instead of bouncing across the stage with those famous over-the-top expressions, Carrey looked calmer, slower, almost thoughtful as he took the award. And honestly, to anyone watching casually, that is just what getting older looks like. The man has been in the spotlight for over 3 decades, and people change. But conspiracy-minded fans saw something else entirely. They zoomed into the way he paused between sentences during his French speech and called it rehearsed. They broke down his facial expressions and argued that the famous stretchiness of his face seemed more held back than the physical comedy legend they grew up watching. The more people picked apart the footage, the more tiny details they claimed to notice. His posture, his laugh, the way he held the trophy. Plenty of viewers brushed it all off, as the internet being the internet. But the talk kept growing because social media rewards boldness, not truth. And millions of fans were now watching the same few seconds of footage on loop, completely sure they were going to crack the case. Now, while all of that was happening online, the people who were actually standing just a few feet from Carrey that night were watching the whole circus with total shock. Remember, he came to Paris with his daughter Jane, his grandson, his partner, and more than a dozen close friends. These are not people he barely knows or random Hollywood faces. These are the people who would instantly notice if something about him was off, and not a single one of them raised any concern. According to event planners, the entire group spent the evening laughing, talking with other guests, and cheering the award like any normal family at a special event. But here is the frustrating part. Even though all of those witnesses were right there in person, the internet chatter barely mentioned them. Viral posts kept laser focusing on a few seconds of stage footage while completely ignoring the hours Carrey spent backstage surrounded by the people who know him best. In the celebrity gossip world, that kind of cherry-picked storytelling happens all the time. A single moment on camera becomes the whole story, while everything outside the frame just fades away. So, by the time the dust finally started settling on this whole saga, the Jim Carrey clone theory had already traveled across millions of screens around the world. Major news outlets reported on it. YouTube channels put out entire videos breaking it down. And social media kept the talk alive way longer than anyone from Carrey's team probably expected. But here is the interesting thing about how these celebrity rumors actually work. Even after official answers show up with receipts and named sources, the internet almost never moves on right away. Instead, the story turns into something bigger. It becomes fun. It becomes a shared moment. It becomes a chat people have at brunch or in group texts, just to see where everyone lands. In this case, the César Awards team kept calmly repeating the same simple answer. Planned for 8 months. Speech worked on in French for weeks. Family and friends there the entire time. From their side, this was exactly what Collier called it, a non-issue. But online, the talk had already taken on a life completely separate from the facts. And honestly, that might be the most interesting part of this whole story. In today's world, what people believe moves faster than truth ever could. A single clip from a ceremony in Paris can spark thousands of hot takes before the people involved even have a chance to respond. By the time Marlia Leslie released that short statement to TMZ and People, the rumor had already reached millions of viewers who had already formed their own opinions. At that point, shutting it down completely was basically not possible. And when you think about it, Jim Carrey is almost the perfect target for exactly this kind of thing. He built his entire career on over-the-top expressions, wild behavior, and deep interviews that sometimes sound like riddles. When the public already sees a famous person as strange or different, even the smallest change in how they act can set off a flood of guessing. Add the power of social media systems that push dramatic theories to the top of everyone's feed, and suddenly a perfectly normal award ceremony turns into the center of a worldwide debate. So what does this whole wild story really tell us? On the surface, it is just another strange celebrity rumor that started with a few curious viewers picking apart a clip way too closely. But underneath that, it shows something much bigger about how modern fame actually works. Famous people do not just live in the real world anymore. They exist inside a never-ending loop of online takes where every move, every pause, every tiny change in tone can become the start of a brand new story. Jim Carrey flew to Paris to accept an award honoring his decades in film. Yet within hours, the talk was not about his amazing career at all. It was about whether the man on stage was even really him. And maybe that is the strangest twist of this entire saga. Not the rumor itself, but how quickly millions of people were willing to believe it. Which raises one final question that the internet still has not been able to answer. If a simple moment on a stage in Paris can spark a global conspiracy theory overnight, what other celebrity stories are quietly being rewritten online right now while nobody is paying attention?